Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. Reporting from Radio Row at the 2015 Conservative Political Action Conference in Washington, we're pleased to have John Pappas, Executive Director of the Poker Players Alliance. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
John, gambling along with smoking and drinking is one of the three great vices of Western civilization. And for generations, politicians have been making hay on it. Where do you fit in the whole thing?
Well, I mean, gambling is one of the interesting ones of those because there is gambling to excess, and there's also gambling for recreation. And I think a majority of Americans use gambling as a form of recreation, just like a majority of Americans probably use alcohol.
Yeah, nice red wine.
As a form of recreation. Smoking is a harder one to justify as something that someone does casually, particularly given all the evidence that is out there about it. But, you know, it's interesting because politicians have always looked at those three issues as something that they want to stand on the stump and rail against, but quietly they recognize those industries bring tremendous tax revenue for states and for them to be able to allocate to other programs that they care about.
Not to mention political contributions.
Sure.
They're very good at having it both ways.
Sure. They could rail against the industry, but at the same time still collect nice campaign checks from that industry. So it is interesting. What we're seeing with internet gambling in particular is that Congress is beginning to pick winners and losers. There's clear exemptions under the law for internet horse racing and internet fantasy sports. But when it comes to a game like poker, Congress has said, no.
It's wicked.
Yeah, it's wicked for some reason. A game that, you know, people play around their kitchen table is okay. But if you take it to the computer table, somehow it becomes an evil thing that needs to be eliminated from society. And so we just think that there is an interesting dichotomy right now in Congress who are struggling with the idea that, okay, this is something that exists. How do we deal with it? And right now it's up to the states to deal with it. We have 3 states that have licensed and regulated internet poker and other forms of internet gaming, and other states that are seeking to do it. And we have a federal government who's pursuing bills today to say, let's ban internet gambling nationwide.
Take us back a little bit through the history of gambling in government. Certainly at the state level, lotteries are a huge moneymaker for the states. We've got casinos in multiple states and on Indian reservations. It seems to be a matter of time before the government figures out how to co-opt various vices. Look at it, the government's now the silent partner in the tobacco business, big time. Take us through the history a little bit, and where are we today in that flow?
Yeah, it is interesting because, you know, there were a time where people would have said, no way will some of these southern states have lotteries. Georgia's got one of the biggest lotteries in the country, and believe it or not, Georgia's taken their lottery online. They actually have an online lottery, so they've even gone further than most states. They're ahead of the curve in terms of offering their games over the internet. So there has been an evolution. I think, I know today that there are 48 of the 50 states have some form of gambling. There's only 2 states in the union that do not have gambling. That's Utah and Hawaii. Utah, obviously, because of
religious
conviction in that state. And Hawaii, I'm not exactly sure why that is. Maybe it's because of the remoteness of the island.
You'd think it'd be a great casino location because it's a huge vacation spot.
It would be, but I think, when you're in Hawaii, I think you'd much rather sit at the beach than sit at a slot machine. At least I know I would. So,
Americans are perfectly free to gamble all day long on complex derivatives, which in many ways looks a lot more like a game of chance than poker does. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, you and I can sit here and debate who the top 10 poker players are, because it is a game of skill. But we could never have a debate to say who the top 10 lottery pickers are in the country. Because it's just, that's a pure game of chance, yet it's a pure game of chance that is available in nearly every single state today. And a game like poker is kind of being pushed aside. Lawmakers are, not only internet poker, which is what our organization is focused on right now, but also home game poker. People organizing home games, small tournaments in their homes.
Actually, police have been raiding them.
That get raided by police, law enforcement spending time and resources and money to go after people playing a $20 poker tournament in their house. I mean, it's crazy. It's literally crazy. So this notion that some forms of activity online are legal and others aren't is awkward. We talked a little bit about fantasy sports having special preferential treatment.
Remind us about that, because that seems to be changing.
Yeah, so fantasy sports, as people remembered them, who maybe a rotisserie league or something like that you used to play in baseball, was a weekly game that you played, or a fantasy football league. It has morphed into an industry.
And sports betting itself is illegal on the Internet.
It is illegal on the Internet, although they've found this very blurred vision of sports gambling with daily fantasy sports. Not saying by any means is daily fantasy sports illegal. It is purely legal.
Remind us what daily fantasy sports are.
So daily fantasy sports is the ability of an individual to pick a team on a daily basis. So in traditional fantasy sports, you would pick a team at the beginning of the year.
For a season.
That would be your team for a season. Now you can pick a team on a day-by-day basis, and you would enter tournaments and compete against other people who pick teams, and however you perform better, however many points you scored, or whatever the equation is to figure out who the winner is, you would be paid out winnings, almost like a poker tournament.
So it's almost like a sports derivative.
It is like a sports derivative. Yeah, no. So we have legal, quasi-legal internet gambling in the U.S., and we have 3 states today that have authorized internet poker and other forms of internet casino
now,
games.
How did the winners who achieved legalization pull it off? Did they do better renting senators and congressmen?
I think it's a little more nuanced than simply renting members of Congress, but certainly the NFL and the major sports leagues back in 2006, when Congress passed the definitive law to try to outlaw internet gambling, although it never really did work. Those groups were very well connected to Congress, and they were able to get their exemption under the law for fantasy sports and horse racing. So there is legal internet horse racing throughout the country as well. I believe about 36 states have legal internet horse wagering as well.
And how do they keep kids off?
It's a good question. The KYC for those sites, because they aren't really regulated by any other body, is still a question mark. In the 3 states that have licensed and regulated poker and casino games, in the over a year that those sites have been up and running, not a single child, not one child has been reported to have created an account and wagered online because of the strong KYC. People view the internet to be...
Know your customer.
Know your customer. People view the internet to be this kind of anonymous place where anybody can go and do things.
Yeah, surprise. It
surprise,
really
surprise, it's not. For someone to register and set up an online poker account, you have to provide a lot of personal information, including your social security number, including a credit history. And as soon as you want to deposit money, there's even a further layer of questions that the company is going to ask you, because they want to know.
Sure. They don't want to break banking laws.
No, they don't want to break banking laws, and they operate like a bank. You are depositing money onto something. They are holding your money for you. You are either winning or losing that money, and then you are taking that money off. It is no different than a bank. So they have to operate like a bank. They have to know every single one of their customers, not only because it's right for them to do, but because it's the law.
And nobody has a problem with that. In terms of the Poker Players Alliance, you're perfectly happy to follow all those rules.
Exactly. Poker players just want the freedom to play. We want to be able to play on a site that's regulated here in the U.S., that has the consumer protections in place, so that as a customer, I know I'm going to deposit my money, I'm going to get my money back, that I know it's being held in trust, that there's not going to be any issues. Today, in the 47 other states that don't have regulated internet poker, it's available. They still play. You're playing on sites that are based
illegal
offshore.
Foreign sites.
Yeah, exactly.
Who knows if you're going to get your money out?
You don't know if you're getting a fair game. You don't know if you're going to get your money back. And back to our original point, the government's getting zero.
Yeah, no revenue.
Not a tax dollar out of it.
So if you solve the problems, and it seems to be that you're doing that in terms of consumer protection, in terms of know your customer, in terms of keeping kids off, who loses if online poker is legalized?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of the casino companies have come around to the notion that, hey, we don't want to be the next Blockbuster. We don't want to be the next bookstores. We would need to diversify our products online.
Better to join them than beat them.
Yes, we need to diversify our products online. This is a complimentary offering. People enjoy their experience in the casino. They go home. They can continue to enjoy that casino experience. And the beautiful thing is that they can offer their customers games at what they call micro levels. So micro stakes. So I can play poker online for pennies.
Yeah.
But in the casino, they're never going to. They're not going to bother with a penny game.
I used to play penny poker with my grandma.
Yeah. So it's a way of extending your reach with the customer, finding new customers. There is one exception to that rule, though. There is a very powerful one of the richest men in the world, who's also a billionaire casino magnate, has decided that internet gambling needs to be stomped out, and that's Sheldon Adelson.
Because it's wicked.
Well, he likes to use a moral argument, but I think it's more likely that he has anti-competitive reasons where he does not view his brand being on the internet space. Therefore, he doesn't want anyone to have their brand on the internet space.
And do we know which congressmen and senators he's rented?
He certainly has the support of folks like Lindsey Graham in the U.S. Senate, Jason Chaffetz in the U.S. House. I mean, Sheldon Adelson last year pumped more than $50 million into different political causes. So he certainly has the ear of congressmen. And for this issue, something where only one person is out there saying we need to ban internet gambling. There's nobody else out there other than Sheldon Adelson and the people he's hired saying it. His issue is leapfrogging so many other issues that Congress is to address. There's supposed to be hearings on this bill very soon. The notion that this is being discussed ahead of so many other things implies that Sheldon has a lot of influence, and Mr. Adelson's money has bought him a lot of goodwill for this bill to be heard.
So, John, the bill in front of Congress now, exactly what is it trying to do?
Well, the bill is H.R. 707. It's interestingly called and mistakenly called the Restoration of America's Wire Act. It seeks to amend It seeks to amend a 1961 law that will say that, you know what, we should apply a sports betting prohibition for the mob using the telephone lines in 1961 to take sports book. Let's apply that to the internet and all forms of internet gambling, not just sports betting.
Well, the FCC just took a 1934 law and applied it to the internet, so maybe there's an approach there that might work.
Right. In 1934 and 1961, I don't think Al Gore had even invented the internet. He hadn't even thought about the internet yet, much less invented it. So it's a perverse manipulation of a 1961 law to try to apply it to today. And it really cuts counter to something that a lot of people disagree with, which is that, hey, states have always had the traditional prerogative to authorize gambling within their own borders.
Yeah, except for prohibition. Vice is usually regulated by the states.
And we know how well that worked out, yeah. So
there's a states' rights issue here as well.
It's a real states' rights issue. I mean, as I mentioned, we have 3 states that have online casino games and poker. There's about a half dozen more states that have online lotteries. We're working in California, Illinois, New York, Pennsylvania today on legislation that's been introduced and is being looked at by the legislature to expand internet gaming in those states. So this federal bill would literally come in and tell the 3 states that already have it and the 6 other states that have lotteries, you got to shut your systems down, and then it would tell the rest of the states that you guys can't do it.
And your members are perfectly happy to be taxed and regulated.
Of course. I mean, that's, the companies that want to operate in the space say, hey, we're gaming companies. We understand that we have to pay taxes on the revenue that we create. And the players understand that, hey, we want to be able to play on sites that are based here in the U.S. so that we have the consumer protections, we have the accountability as consumers. We don't have that in the current marketplace where I'm forced as a player to go log onto a site that's based in Curacao and play online poker.
So, John, you're a gambler. How do you rate your odds of success in this fight?
I'm feeling like we're a favorite right now just because the momentum in the states is growing. The ability of lawmakers to really believe that it's in their federal lawmakers in their interest to tell states what to do is getting a lot of pushback. I think they're very hesitant to say, wait, okay, I came here to Washington to make government smaller, and now you're
going back and taking my states to task.
Yeah, you're telling me what I'm supposed to tell my states to do. That may not work out so well. So I feel like we've got a pretty good hand. The other side has a strong hand as well.
They got a bigger chip stack.
And they got a much bigger chip stack, and they're pushing those chips around. So we need to be confident in what we have and make sure that we play smartly. And in the end, I think we can win, because one of the things that we always know is that technology and progress always marches on. And this notion that somehow Congress is going to bottle up the internet on internet gaming is unrealistic. So they can do this prohibition, whatever they want to call it. You don't think people are still going to play poker and other games on the internet? Of course they are. They're just going to do it on sites based overseas and no consumer protections and no revenue for the states or for the federal government.
Well, John, thanks for coming on the show and sharing your story, and good luck with your fight.
Thank you so much.
That was John Pappas, Executive Director of the Poker Players Alliance, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. Sign up for updates on realclearradio.org, like us on Facebook, or follow the show on Twitter at RealClearFrezza. And stop by America's premier independent political website, realclearpolitics.com. I check Real Clear every morning for both original content and digital curation of stories from around the world. Next up, last but not least, is former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson, Republican Party gadfly, talking politics, hypocrisy, and marijuana legalization. Stay tuned.